Adrian Cole had exactly 17 minutes to land the job that would save his daughter's future. But as he watched the CEO's Bentley disappear around the corner, the same woman whose tire he'd just changed in the pouring rain, his phone buzzed with a text that made his blood freeze. Interview moved to conference room A. Don't be late. A. Grant. The mud on his hands suddenly felt like concrete. The woman who'd stood there in designer heels, letting a stranger ruin his $1 million shot, was Alexis Grant, the Ice Queen, the woman who fired people for arriving 30 seconds late, and he'd just saved her from being stranded. "Sir?" The receptionist's voice cut through his shock. "Ms. Grant is waiting." Adrian looked down at his ruined suit, then at the elevator doors closing like jaws. What do you do when helping someone becomes the very thing that destroys you? The morning had started with such promise. Adrian Cole stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time, watching his reflection practice the smile he'd rehearsed 100 times. At 42, he still carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd once commanded construction sites and boardrooms. The silver threading through his dark hair only added to his distinguished appearance, and the way he filled out his tailored suit, even one bought second-hand, spoke of shoulders that had carried more than their share of responsibility. His daughter Emma's photo sat on the dresser behind him, 8 years old, gap-toothed grin, holding her honor roll certificate. The interview at Grant Industries wasn't just another job opportunity. It was their lifeline. "Dad, you look nervous," Emma said from the doorway, her backpack already slung over her small shoulders. She had their late mother's intuition, always seeing straight through his carefully constructed facades. "Just making sure I look professional, kiddo," Adrian replied, smoothing down his hair. The years since Sarah's death had carved lines around his eyes, but they were good lines, the kind that came from smiling through heartbreak, from being both mother and father to a little girl who needed him to be strong. Even in grief, even in financial uncertainty, Adrian Cole was the kind of man who turned heads when he walked into a room. The kind of man other fathers envied, and mothers remembered long after PTA meetings. Emma walked over and straightened his tie with the seriousness of a seasoned stylist. "Mom always said you were the smartest person she knew. They'd be crazy not to hire you." Adrian's throat tightened. Sarah had been the breadwinner, the vice president of marketing at a tech startup. When she passed, Adrian had been a mid-level project manager at a construction firm, comfortable but not wealthy. Now, after months of reduced hours to care for Emma and mounting medical bills that insurance hadn't covered, comfortable was a distant memory. "Remember what we talked about?" Adrian said, kneeling to Emma's eye level. "Mrs. Patterson will pick you up after school, and I'll be home by dinner with good news." Emma hugged him tight. "I love you, Dad. You're going to do great." As Adrian drove through downtown Seattle, the familiar knot in his stomach tightened. Grant Industries occupied the top 15 floors of the Columbia Center, their glass facade reflecting the gray October sky like a mirror. He'd researched Alexis Grant extensively. 36 years old, took over her father's construction empire at 28, transformed it into a billion-dollar conglomerate. But the company was bleeding talent and facing delays on their flagship waterfront development project. Word in the industry was that Grant Industries needed fresh leadership, someone who could bridge the gap between Alexis's vision and the practical realities of construction management. The business magazines called her brilliant but ruthless. Former employees whispered about her impossibly high standards and zero tolerance for excuses. The rain started as a light mist, then quickly intensified into the kind of downpour that made Seattle famous. Adrian's windshield wipers struggled against the deluge as he navigated the congested streets. He was making good time, would arrive 20 minutes early, just as he'd planned. That's when he saw her. The black Bentley was pulled onto the shoulder of Pine Street, hazard lights blinking like a desperate SSR. A woman stood beside it, her designer coat soaked through, phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, Adrian could see her frustration in the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she paced beside her disabled vehicle. Adrian's father's voice echoed in his memory. "A real man stops to help, son, no matter what." It was one of the few lessons from his old man that had stuck, one of the few that mattered. He pulled over without hesitation. The woman looked up as Adrian approached, rain streaming down his face. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and piercing blue eyes that seemed to catalogue everything about him in seconds. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, now slightly dishevelled from the weather. For a moment, something flickered across her expression. Surprise, perhaps, at finding herself face to face with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement, even drenched in rain. "Need help?" Adrian called out over the rain. She hesitated, clearly weighing whether to trust a stranger. "My tire blew out. I've called roadside assistance, but they're saying at least an hour." Adrian glanced at his watch. He still had time. "I can change it for you. You have a spare?" "You don't understand," she said, her voice carrying an edge of panic barely held in check. "I have an extremely important meeting in 20 minutes. I cannot be late." "Then let's make sure you're not," Adrian replied, already moving toward her trunk. "Pop it open." For a moment, she just stared at him. Even soaked and dishevelled, Adrian Cole commanded attention. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident without arrogance, strong without being intimidating. People probably didn't offer to help Alexis Grant very often, not without wanting something in return. But desperation won out, and she pressed her key fob. The spare tire was buried under shopping bags from Nordstrom and a laptop case that probably cost more than Adrian's monthly rent. He worked quickly, his suit jacket discarded and shirt sleeves rolled up. The rain soaked through his dress shirt, and mud splattered up his pants legs as he knelt on the asphalt. "You're getting destroyed out here," the woman said, hovering nearby with her phone clutched in one hand and an umbrella in the other, though she made no move to share it. She found herself watching the way his shoulders moved as he worked, the casual competence of a man who'd spent years solving other people's problems. "It's just rain," Adrian grunted, wrestling with a particularly stubborn lug nut. "And just clothes." She was quiet for a moment, watching him work with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Most people would have kept driving. Most people weren't raised by my father," Adrian replied. The truth was more complicated. Most people didn't understand what it felt like to be truly desperate, to know that one missed opportunity could mean the difference between keeping your child fed and housed or not. Helping others was one of the few things that still made him feel human. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. Adrian looked up from the tire, rain dripping from his hair. "Adrian Cole." She nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. "I'm Alex." Just Alex, not the full introduction he might have expected from someone driving a car worth more than his annual salary. He liked that about her, the simplicity in the middle of the chaos. The tire change took 18 minutes. 18 minutes that Adrian watched tick by on his phone with growing anxiety. By the time he'd tightened the last lug nut and loaded the flat tire into her trunk, his interview was supposed to start in 12 minutes. "How much do I owe you?" Alex asked, reaching for her purse. "Nothing," Adrian said, shrugging back into his soaked jacket. "Just pay it forward sometime." She stared at him with those piercing blue eyes, and for a moment Adrian thought she might say something more. Instead, she nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you, Adrian Cole," she said. "I won't forget this." She climbed into her Bentley and pulled away, leaving Adrian standing in the rain, checking his reflection in his phone's camera. His suit was ruined, his hair plastered to his head, and mud streaked across his shirt. He looked like he'd been wrestling with the street and lost. Adrian drove the remaining 6 blocks to Grant Industries, his heart hammering against his ribs. The company's lobby was all marble and steel, designed to intimidate. He caught his reflection in the polished surfaces and winced. Other job candidates sat in leather chairs, their pristine suits a sharp contrast to his disheveled appearance. "Adrian Cole for the 3 o'clock interview," he told the receptionist, water still dripping from his clothes. She looked him up and down with poorly concealed disgust. "Please have a seat, Mr. Cole. I'll let them know you've arrived." Adrian sat in the waiting area, acutely aware of the other candidates' stares. A man in an expensive suit whispered something to his companion, and they both chuckled. Adrian's cheeks burned, but he kept his chin up. Emma's face flashed in his mind, her trust, her certainty that her dad was going to save the day. "Mr. Cole?" A young woman in a business suit appeared. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, head of human resources. I'm afraid there's been a change. The interview has been moved to conference room A." Adrian followed her through a maze of corridors, his wet shoes squeaking against the polished floors. With each step, his confidence eroded a little more. He'd blown it before he'd even opened his mouth. Conference room A was intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline, a massive mahogany table that could seat 20. Adrian took a seat at one end, trying not to drip on the leather chair. "Miss Grant will be with you shortly," Jennifer said, then paused at the door. "Mr. Cole, you might want to—" She gestured vaguely at his appearance. "Thank you," Adrian replied, though there wasn't much he could do about his situation now. He sat alone for 5 minutes that felt like 50, rehearsing his opening lines, trying to figure out how to explain his appearance without sounding like he was making excuses. Through the rain-streaked windows, Seattle sprawled below him, millions of people going about their lives while his hung in the balance. The door opened. Adrian stood, turning toward the sound, and his world shifted on its axis. "You're late, Mr. Cole." Alex stood in the doorway, but she wasn't Alex anymore. Her wet hair had been perfectly styled, her soaked designer coat replaced by a sharp black suit that screamed authority. This was Alexis Grant, the woman whose tire he'd just changed, the CEO who held his family's future in her hands. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. His mouth went dry, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. This was impossible. The desperate woman on the side of the road, the one who'd watched him ruin his chances while he saved her day, she was supposed to be interviewing him? "Ms. Grant," Adrian managed, his voice barely steady. "I can explain." "Sit down, Mr. Cole," Alexis said, her tone as cold as the October rain still pattering against the windows. She moved to the opposite end of the table, placing a manila folder between them like a barrier. Her blue eyes, which had seemed grateful just 30 minutes ago, were now unreadable. Adrian sat, acutely aware of the water still dripping from his clothes, of the mud stains on his pants, of how thoroughly he'd destroyed his one chance. "About my appearance. Punctuality is non-negotiable at Grant Industries," Alexis interrupted, opening his file. "We value reliability, professionalism, and attention to detail. 3 qualities you've failed to demonstrate today." Each word was a knife twist. Adrian watched her flip through his resume. 15 years of project management experience, stellar recommendations, awards for client satisfaction, all of it meaningless now because he'd stopped to help a stranger, because he'd stopped to help her. "I understand that," Adrian said carefully, "but sometimes there are no circumstances that excuse unprofessionalism." Alexis cut him off. Her voice was steady, controlled, betraying nothing of the gratitude she'd shown 20 minutes earlier. "In this business, your word is everything. If you can't be trusted to arrive on time, how can you be trusted with multi-million-dollar projects?" Adrian felt something crack inside his chest. This was more than just losing a job. This was losing the last hope he had of providing for Emma. of keeping their small apartment, of maintaining even a shred of the stability his daughter deserved. "Miss Grant," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I stopped to help someone whose car had broken down. Someone who was stranded in the rain, who had an important meeting to get to." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I believe that helping others, even at personal cost, demonstrates exactly the kind of character you'd want in an employee." For just a moment, something flickered across Alexis's face. A crack in the professional mask, a hint of the woman who'd stood beside her disabled Bentley. But it was gone so quickly that Adrian wondered if he'd imagined it. "Noble sentiments don't complete construction projects on time and under budget," she replied. "I need reliability, not charity." Adrian stared at her, searching for any sign of the person he'd helped, any acknowledgement of what had transpired between them. But Alexis Grant, CEO, had thoroughly consumed Alex, the stranded woman. It was like looking at a completely different person. "This interview is over," Alexis said, closing his file with finality. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Cole." Adrian stood slowly, his legs unsteady. 20 years of his father's lessons about doing the right thing, about helping people in need, about being the kind of man others could count on, all of it had just cost him everything. But even in defeat, even soaked and humiliated, Adrian Cole carried himself with a dignity that made Alexis's chest tighten unexpectedly. "For what it's worth," Adrian said, his hand on the conference room door, "I'd do it again. Some things are more important than being on time." He didn't wait for her response. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like descending into hell. Adrian's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man who looked defeated, worn down, older than his years. The other job candidates were gone now, probably celebrating successful interviews while he faced the prospect of telling his 8-year-old daughter that Daddy had failed again. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the damage was done. Adrian sat in his car for 10 minutes, staring up at the Grant Industries building, wondering if Alexis Grant was watching from her corner office as another casualty of her rigid standards drove away. His phone buzzed with the text from Emma. "How did it go, Dad? Are you coming home with good news?" Adrian stared at the message until the words blurred. How do you tell your child that the world isn't fair? That sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything? That her father, despite all his promises and preparations, had let her down when it mattered most? He started the engine and drove home through the grey Seattle afternoon, each mile taking him further from hope and closer to a conversation he dreaded having. Emma was waiting by the window when he pulled into their apartment complex parking lot, her face pressed against the glass, backpack still on as if she'd been ready to celebrate the moment he walked through the door. "Dad," she called out as soon as he opened the front door. "Tell me everything. Do you start Monday? Did they like your tie?" Adrian looked down at his ruined clothes, at the physical evidence of a good deed that had cost him everything, and felt his heart break a little more. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the world doesn't reward kindness the way the storybooks say it should? "It didn't go quite as planned, sweetheart," Adrian said, sinking onto their second-hand couch. Emma climbed up beside him, her small face serious now, reading the disappointment in his expression. "What happened?" Adrian wrapped his arm around his daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sometimes, Em, you have to choose between doing what's right and doing what's easy. I chose to do what was right, but it cost me the job." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "Did you help someone?" "Yes." "And they needed help?" "Yes." Emma nodded solemnly. "Then you did the right thing, Dad. Mom always said doing the right thing is never wrong, even when it feels like it is." Adrian's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back all afternoon. His 8-year-old daughter understood something that a billionaire CEO apparently couldn't, that some things mattered more than schedules and first impressions. That evening, as Adrian tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with Sarah's eyes and said, "Don't worry, Dad. Something good is going to happen. I can feel it." Adrian kissed her forehead, wishing he had her faith, her certainty that the world would somehow balance itself out. But as he sat in his living room later that night, staring at his laptop screen and scrolling through job listings that paid half what the Grant Industries position would have, he felt nothing but the cold weight of reality. 3 blocks away, in her penthouse office, Alexis Grant stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The waterfront project files were spread across her desk. 3 months behind schedule, 2 contractors who'd already walked away, and a board of directors breathing down her neck. She'd built her reputation on impossible standards, on never accepting excuses, on demanding perfection from everyone around her. But perfection wasn't solving her problems. She picked up Adrian Cole's resume for the 3rd time that evening. 15 years of project management experience, awards for bringing complex builds in on time and under budget, references who called him the kind of leader people would follow anywhere, and client testimonials that used words like integrity, reliability, and genuine. Alexis sank into her leather chair, remembering the way he'd knelt in the mud without hesitation, the way he'd refused her money, the quiet dignity with which he'd accepted her dismissal. "Some things are more important than being on time," he'd said. In her world, nothing was more important than being on time. But maybe that was exactly her problem. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "The Morrison Group called again about the waterfront delays. Board meeting moved to Thursday." Alexis stared at the message, then back at Adrian's file. She'd spent 8 years building walls, creating systems, demanding excellence through fear. And where had it gotten her? Talented people fled her company as soon as better opportunities arose. Contractors walked away rather than deal with her impossible standards. She was drowning in her own success, surrounded by yes-men who were too afraid to tell her the truth. But Adrian Cole had told her the truth. Even knowing it would cost him the job, he'd stood by his principles. How long had it been since anyone had shown her that kind of authenticity? Alexis reached for her phone, then hesitated. This went against everything she'd built her career on. But as she looked at the waterfront project files, at the mounting evidence that her current approach wasn't working, she realized she needed more than another employee who would follow orders. She needed someone who would do the right thing, even when it was hard. His phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Alexis Grant." Adrian's breath caught. "Miss Grant, Hello? I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Pike Place Market, the original Starbucks. Do you know it?" "I do, but come alone. And Mr. Cole, wear whatever you'd like. Punctuality is still important, but I think we need to discuss what really matters." The line went dead before Adrian could respond. He stared at his phone, wondering what game Alexis Grant was playing now. But as Emma had said, something good was going to happen. At least, he hoped she was right. The original Starbucks at Pike Place Market was a tourist trap, always crowded, always chaotic. But at 7 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, it was relatively quiet. Adrian arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and claimed a small table near the window where he could watch the market vendors setting up their stalls. Alexis Grant walked in at exactly 7 o'clock. She looked different again, still professional, but softer somehow. Her hair was down, falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater instead of a power suit. She looked more like the woman he'd helped on the side of the road than the ice queen who'd dismissed him yesterday. But there was something else in her expression now. Uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. "Mr. Cole," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." I wasn't sure you'd show up, Adrian admitted. I wasn't sure I would either. Alexis ordered a latte from the barista, then turned her attention back to him. I did something yesterday that I've been regretting ever since. Adrian waited, not sure where this was going. I let my reputation make my decisions for me instead of my judgment. She continued. For 8 years, I've built Grant Industries on the principle that excellence requires sacrifice, that success demands ruthless standards. I've fired people for being late, for missing deadlines, for not meeting my expectations. And I've told myself that this is what leadership looks like. But my company is hemorrhaging talent, my waterfront project is 3 months behind schedule, and my board is questioning my leadership. Maybe ruthless standards aren't the answer. She paused, stirring her latte thoughtfully. But yesterday, a man I'd never met gave up something important to help a stranger. He ruined his interview, destroyed his chances at a job he clearly needed, and asked for nothing in return. And instead of recognizing that character, I punished him for it. Then I went home and realized that I need someone exactly like that on my team. Ms. Grant. Please let me finish. Alexis met his eyes. I went home last night and couldn't stop thinking about what you said. That some things are more important than being on time. My entire business philosophy is built on the opposite premise. But you were right. Adrian felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, but he kept it carefully contained. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like you to consider working with me, Alexis said carefully. Not as an employee reporting to some middle manager, but as a partner. I have a waterfront development project that's falling apart. 3 months behind schedule, contractors walking away, my board questioning every decision I make. I need someone who can look at it with fresh eyes, someone the crews will actually want to work with. She leaned forward. I need someone who understands that treating people well isn't a weakness. It's the only way to get real results. Adrian stared at her, processing what she was really offering. You're talking about a consulting arrangement? I'm talking about a trial partnership. 6 months, full project authority on the waterfront development. If we can turn it around together, we'll discuss something more permanent. If not, you'll walk away with enough money to take care of your daughter while you find the right opportunity elsewhere. Alexis met his eyes. What I can't offer you is a guarantee. What I can offer you is a chance to prove that doing the right thing actually works in the real world. Adrian looked down at the contract she'd slid across the table, then back up at Alexis. Why didn't you tell me who you were yesterday? When I was changing your tire. Alexis smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Because for 20 minutes I got to be just Alex, a woman who needed help, who met a man kind enough to give it. I haven't been just Alex in a very long time. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the market waking up around them, providing a gentle backdrop to the conversation that was changing both their lives. Adrian could feel the weight of possibility settling around him, not the desperate grab for salvation he'd felt yesterday, but something more solid, more earned. I have one condition, Adrian said finally. Name it. If someone on my team needs to leave early for a sick kid, or shows up late because they stopped to help someone, or makes a human mistake because they're dealing with something difficult at home, we give them grace. We remember that we're all people first, employees second. Alexis extended her hand across the small table. Mr. Cole, I think this partnership is going to change everything. As Adrian shook her hand, he thought about Emma, probably getting ready for school at that moment, humming to herself the way she did when she was happy. He thought about his father's lessons, about doing the right thing even when it was hard, about the way kindness could ripple outward in ways you never expected. One more thing, Alexis said as they stood to leave. I owe you $18 for the tire change, plus tip. Adrian laughed, really laughed. for the first time in months. I think we can call it even. Outside the coffee shop, the Seattle morning was bright and clear, the previous day's rain having washed the world clean. Adrian walked to his car with the contract in his pocket and hope in his chest, thinking about the conversation he was going to have with his daughter when she got home from school. Not about salvation handed down from above, but about opportunity earned through integrity. As he drove home to call Emma's school and tell them that yes, he'd be able to chaperone the field trip after all, and yes, he could finally afford the art supplies she'd been wanting, Adrian Cole discovered something his father had never told him about doing the right thing. Sometimes the reward isn't immediate. Sometimes it requires you to prove yourself, to earn what you receive. But when it comes, it's worth the wait. 6 months later, when the waterfront project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, when Alexis offered him a permanent partnership in Grant Industries, and when Emma's college fund finally had enough money in it to guarantee her future, Adrian would look back on that rainy morning and understand that kindness isn't just about the moment you give it. It's about the foundation you build for everything that comes after.